Hello. I'm glad you found your way here, because tonight we're drifting far back through time to a land wrapped in mystery and wonder, a place so ancient that even the ancients themselves once looked back on it as old. A kingdom of powerful gods and immortal pharaohs, forgotten cities, and sacred texts carved into stone. A world where the sun didn't just rise, it gave life. Where the dead were believed to walk among the stars, and every grain of sand held a story, waiting to be remembered. Wherever you are right now, let this be your moment to slow down. Let go of the noise of the day, feel your thoughts soften, your pace slow, and allow your mind to gently sink into the stillness of the past. Tonight, we'll wander through myths and mummies, beneath hidden tombs and towering obelisks. We'll meet crocodile gods, queens who defied history itself, and builders who accomplished the impossible. Some of what you hear may surprise you. Other parts may drift past like fragments of a dream you can't quite hold on to. And if this kind of quiet wonder brings you peace, or even just a little curiosity, I'd truly appreciate it if you like and subscribe. It helps more sleepy travelers find their way here. But for now, get comfortable. Take a slow, deep breath, and let this sleepy journey into ancient Egypt begin. Egypt lasted so long that even its own people, in its later ages, looked back on it as something ancient. It's strange to think about, but Cleopatra lived closer in time to us than she did to the builders of the Great Pyramid. She ruled in the 1st century BCE, during the final breath of a civilization already thousands of years old. By then, the pyramids were already more than 2,000 years old themselves. In fact, what we call ancient Egypt lasted for over 3,000 years, longer than most of recorded history that followed it. It rose, changed, fractured, and reformed through hundreds of pharaohs, dozens of dynasties, and countless cycles of rise and decline. And yet, through all of it, one thing remained constant: the Nile, the same sacred river flowing past every era, the same stars turning slowly above every temple. Time in Egypt didn't simply pass. It layered itself, like sediment laid down year after year along the riverbanks. So when we think of Egypt, we're not looking at a single moment in history. We're looking at a slow-burning miracle of continuity, older than memory, and still not fully understood. The Nile didn't just flood, it told time. Each year, like clockwork, the river rose. In late summer, water swelled from distant rains, spilling beyond its banks and transforming desert into fertile soil. To the Egyptians, this wasn't chaos or disaster. It was life itself, a divine rhythm, a blessing from the gods. They built their entire world around it. Their calendar began not in winter or spring, but with the river's return. Even the stars were part of this system, especially Sirius, whose reappearance in the sky signaled the coming flood. Everything depended on this rhythm: planting, harvesting, building, praying. Even their myths reflected it, the cycles of death, burial, and rebirth repeating across gods and mortals alike. The river didn't just nourish the land, it shaped how they understood existence itself, time, eternity, and the fragile boundary between life and death. Pharaohs were considered gods on earth, yet even they were bound by higher laws. To rule Egypt was to stand between heaven and earth. The pharaoh was not merely a king, he was Horus made flesh, the living embodiment of divine authority. Statues depicted him with sacred symbols: the crook and flail, the cobra crown, the false beard of kingship. His image was holy, his word was law, and yet, even a god-king could be judged. Its body is that of a lion, symbol of strength and protection. Its face, however, has been weathered and debated for centuries. Some believe it represents a known pharaoh. Others argue it was recarved later. A few even suggest it may belong to a far older and forgotten tradition entirely. For long periods of history, It was buried up to its neck in sand, as if the desert itself was trying to hide it. Even now, its expression remains calm and unreadable, neither welcoming nor hostile. It does not answer questions. It simply invites them. It waits and it endures. But in ancient Egypt, not only stone carried meaning, writing itself was alive. Hieroglyphs were not just language. They were considered a sacred force. Each symbol, whether a bird, an eye, or a twisted rope, held power beyond sound or grammar. Some were treated with such reverence that scribes avoided fully carving dangerous creatures, fearing they might come alive in the physical world. Snakes and harmful animals were often drawn incomplete on purpose, symbolically restrained. Priests even performed spoken rituals over inscriptions, believing words could activate reality itself. Tombs were not decorated for beauty. They were built as functioning systems of protection, nourishment, and memory. The written word was meant to feed the dead, guard their journey, and preserve their identity for eternity. In Egypt, writing was a form of magic, and reading it, even now, feels like listening to something that was never meant to fade. And then there was death itself. Becoming a mummy was not quick, nor simple. It was a 70-day sacred process, part ritual, part science, part transformation. It began with purification, washing the body with sacred waters. Then came the removal of internal organs, the stomach, lungs, liver, and intestines, each placed in protective vessels. The brain was carefully extracted through the nose and discarded, as it was not considered essential to identity. The heart, however, was left in place, believed to be the center of thought, memory, and soul. It would later be judged in the afterlife. The body was then dried using natron, a natural salt that slowly removed all moisture. After weeks of preparation, it was wrapped in layers of linen, with amulets placed between the folds for protection. Every step carried meaning. Every action had a purpose. Death was not an ending. It was a transformation. And mummification was the craft of preparing a person for eternity. Even in life, ancient Egyptians were remarkably advanced in medicine. They could set broken bones, stitch wounds, and diagnose illness by observing the pulse. Medical papyri describe treatments for everything from toothaches to digestive issues and infections. They used honey as a natural antiseptic and willow bark, containing compounds similar to modern aspirin, for pain relief. Healing was not purely physical. Emotional suffering was also recognized, with treatments combining herbs, rituals, and spoken remedies for grief, anxiety, and restlessness. The line between doctor and priest was thin. Both believed healing required balance between body, spirit, and unseen forces. In a world ruled by gods, medicine was both science and sacred practice. And yet, among all their sacred beliefs, few were as deeply felt as their reverence for cats. In ancient Egypt, cats were not just animals. They were protectors, symbols of grace, and earthly reflections of divine power. The goddess Bastet, often depicted with a feline head, was associated with protection, fertility, and the home. Because of this, cats were cherished, protected, and even legally safeguarded. So much so that killing a cat, even accidentally, could result in severe punishment. Greek historians wrote of entire crowds erupting in rage over harm done to a single cat, a reflection of just how deeply this reverence ran. Families would often mummify their cats as well, burying them in miniature sarcophagi as acts of devotion and mourning. In grief, some even shaved their eyebrows as a visible sign of loss. Entire temples housed sacred cats, fed and cared for as living symbols of protection. They hunted snakes, guarded homes, watched over children, and curled beside the dead as if bridging two worlds at once. To live in ancient Egypt was to share your world with creatures seen as both ordinary and divine. Temples, however, were not simply places of worship. They were believed to be the actual homes of the gods. Stepping inside an Egyptian temple was not like entering a church. It was crossing into a constructed universe designed for divine presence. Every corridor, courtyard, and chamber followed a sacred architectural path, guiding movement toward the most restricted and holy space, the inner sanctuary. There, hidden from public view, stood the god statue. It was not symbolic in the modern sense. It was treated as a living presence, washed, dressed, anointed, and fed daily by priests. Offerings were placed before it, and incense filled the air to invite divine attention. Most Egyptians never saw the god directly. Only priests entered the deepest chambers, while the public observed rituals from outer courtyards during festivals. The temple itself was considered a model of the cosmos. Its walls marked the boundaries of creation. Its ceiling represented the night sky filled with stars. To walk through it was to move through a physical representation of the universe itself. In Egypt, gods were not distant. They had homes, and those homes still remain carved in stone. But the journey after death was far more dangerous than anything in life. Death was not an end. It was the beginning of a long and perilous passage. The soul had to travel through gates, caverns, deserts, and rivers, each guarded by monsters, demons, or divine judges. Along the way, it had to remember secret names, answer riddles, and recite sacred passwords to continue forward. At every stage, spells from the Book of the Dead served as guidance, a kind of map for the invisible world. Eventually, the soul arrived at the Hall of Two Truths. There, its heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the symbol of truth and cosmic order. If the heart was light and pure, the soul was allowed to pass into eternal peace. But if it was heavy with sin, it was devoured by Ammit, a terrifying creature, part lion, crocodile, and hippopotamus, erasing the soul completely. No second chances, no return. This belief shaped everything. The dead were buried with food, tools, prayers, and spells, anything needed to survive what came next. In Egypt, death was not feared. It was prepared for. Even the gods reflected the natural world through animal forms. Horus appeared with the head of a falcon, representing the sky and the sharp vision of kingship. Anubis, with a jackal's head, guarded cemeteries where real jackals once roamed. Sobek, the crocodile god, embodied the raw power and danger of the Nile itself. These were not costumes. They were expressions of truth, ways of showing how divine forces moved through nature itself. To the Egyptians, the gods were not outside the world. They were inside it. So when a hawk circled the sun or a cat rested quietly in a doorway, it was not just an animal. It was a reminder that the sacred could appear anywhere, hidden within the ordinary. The Book of the Dead was never a single book, and it was never meant for the living. It was a collection of spells, hymns, and instructions written specifically for each individual. Some versions were short, others stretched across meters of papyrus or filled entire tomb walls. They were placed beside the dead, not for reading, but for use in another world. Guides for speech, for movement, for survival after death. Some tombs even included board games for the afterlife. Among gold, amulets, food, and statues, archaeologists often find carved game boards, especially Senet, a game of movement and fate played across a simple grid. To modern eyes, it may look like a pastime. To the Egyptians, it mirrored the journey of the soul. Players moved pieces past dangers, towards safety, and finally into a place of rest. Kings played it in life and believed they would continue playing it in eternity. Boards were carved from wood, ivory, or stone, sometimes accompanied by painted instructions on tomb walls. In a world filled with uncertainty, even the afterlife had its games, and the dead, wrapped in linen and silence, were sent forward with pieces in hand, ready for one final match beneath the stars. For the Egyptians, the brain was considered unnecessary. The heart, however, contained everything that mattered. Today, we associate thought, memory, and identity with the brain. But in ancient Egypt, it was the heart that held emotion, judgment, truth, and identity itself. It was never removed during mummification. It remained inside the body because it would one day speak for you. Even amulets were shaped like tiny hearts, placed close to the real one to protect it. Without the heart, rebirth was impossible. And if it was judged impure, the soul would not return at all. To the Egyptians, wisdom did not come from the head. It came from the center of being. And the heart, they believed, never lied. Long before parchment or modern paper, Egypt gave the world something extraordinary: papyrus. Made from the tall reeds along the Nile, papyrus was pressed, layered, and dried into sheets, then joined into scrolls. Light, flexible, and surprisingly durable, it became the foundation of written culture. On these scrolls were recorded hymns, tax records, medical texts, love poems, and mythological stories. Some were buried with the dead. Others were lost in desert ruins. Many still survive today. Despite floods, insects, and thousands of years of time, these fragile sheets remain legible. Some even preserve the fingerprints of their writers. Others are so well preserved they could be read aloud today. Every brushstroke feels like a human presence reaching across millennia, voices that never fully disappeared. But in Egyptian belief, even the divine world was not fixed. Gods could change form, die, be reborn, or emerge from chaos itself. They were not static beings. They were living forces. Osiris was torn apart and later resurrected. Atum created existence from nothing, even from his own essence. Sekhmet, the goddess of war, once nearly destroyed humanity, only to be calmed through deception and transformed into Hathor, goddess of joy. Between destruction and creation, wrath and love, the boundary was thin. The gods reflected the world they ruled, harsh, fertile, unpredictable, and always changing. Among Egypt's most iconic symbols was the Ankh. More than a symbol, it was a key, representing life itself. Not just physical existence, but eternal life beyond death. Often shown in the hands of gods, it was depicted being offered to the nose of kings and souls, as if breathing life back into them. It appeared on jewelry, tomb walls, sarcophagi, and sacred objects. Some believed it represented the sun rising over the horizon. Others saw it as a divine knot binding life and eternity together. But all interpretations agreed on one truth. It was a promise that life did not end, but continued beyond this world. In ancient Egypt, women held a status far more powerful than in many other ancient societies. They could own property, inherit wealth, run businesses, and enter legal contracts independently. They could sue in court and manage their own estates. Records and tomb paintings show women working as priestesses, musicians, scribes, and physicians. And at the highest level, a few even ruled as pharaohs in their own right, not as symbolic queens, but as sovereign rulers. Power was not always equal, but it was real. A woman in Egypt could be a voice, a leader, and a presence carved into stone. Even the symbols of kingship reflected this fluidity. Pharaohs, male and female alike, wore false beards. These were not signs of masculinity, but of divinity. The beard was a sacred emblem associated with Osiris, god of the afterlife. By wearing it, a ruler was not pretending to be a man. They were embodying a divine role. Even female rulers like Hatshepsut adopted this sacred regalia, appearing in statues with a ceremonial beard. crown and royal kilt. It was not disguise. It was transformation, a way of stepping beyond human identity and into something closer to divine order. One of Egypt's most powerful rulers was also one of the most historically threatened. Hatshepsut ruled for over 2 decades during a time of prosperity, expansion, and monumental construction. She oversaw trade expeditions, restored temples, and commissioned architectural masterpieces, including her breathtaking temple at Deir el-Bahari. But after her death, her legacy was systematically erased. Her statues were destroyed. Her name was chiseled out of inscriptions. Her memory was pushed toward silence. For centuries, she was nearly forgotten, until modern archaeology slowly rebuilt her story from broken stone. Today, she stands again, not as myth, but as history restored. Cleopatra, too, ruled at the edge of empire. Though she was Queen of Egypt, her lineage was Macedonian Greek, descended from the generals of Alexander the Great. She was the first in her dynasty to speak Egyptian fluently, and she mastered politics, language, and diplomacy with extraordinary skill. She formed alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, trying to preserve Egypt's independence as Rome's shadow grew stronger. But when defeat came, she chose death over captivity. With her passing, Egypt formally became part of Rome. She was the last pharaoh, not just of a kingdom, but of an era collapsing into history. Egyptian daily life, too, reflected both practicality and symbolism. Wigs were not fashion, they were protection. In the harsh climate, many Egyptians shaved their heads for hygiene and comfort, but a bare head could signal low status. So wigs became both practical and social necessity. Made from human hair or plant fibers, they were styled, scented, and carefully maintained. Even children wore them during ceremonies. For the elite, appearing in public without a wig was unthinkable. In tombs, wigs were placed beside the dead so they could maintain dignity in the afterlife. Hair in Egypt was identity, and the wig was a portable crown. Even something as simple as beer carried deep meaning. Safer than water, beer was a daily staple in ancient Egypt. Brewed from barley and baked bread, it was thick, nourishing, and slightly sour. Laborers were often paid in it. Priests offered it to the gods. Children drank it regularly. It was food, medicine, and ritual all at once. At festivals, massive batches were brewed for celebration, joy, and communal life. To drink beer was to participate in the rhythm of existence. To brew it was to imitate creation itself. Even footwear revealed social identity. Most Egyptians walked barefoot in daily life. When sandals were worn, materials spoke clearly about status. The poor used woven plant fibers. Wealthier citizens wore leather, but the elite, and especially royalty, sometimes wore sandals made of gold. Even what touched the ground carried meaning in Egypt. These golden sandals were not meant for walking. They were created for burial. Placed inside tombs alongside linen wrappings, perfume jars, and offerings, they were designed to carry the dead into the afterlife in dignity, status, and style. Some were even engraved with images of enemies, so the wearer could symbolically trample them forever in eternity. In both life and death, what rested beneath your feet reflected who you were and where you hoped to go. The idea that pyramid builders were slaves has also changed with modern archaeology. Evidence now shows that the builders of the Great Pyramids were skilled, paid laborers, stonecutters, engineers, planners, and craftsmen. Many lived in organized worker settlements near the construction sites. They ate well, bread, beer, beef, and fish. They received medical care, and some were even buried in tombs near the pyramids they helped construct, suggesting pride and recognition in their work. These monuments were not built by nameless suffering masses, but by organized communities contributing to a national project, part engineering, part devotion, part identity. Their lives were real. Their hands are still in the stones. The Egyptian calendar itself reflected a unique relationship with time. It was based on 365 days, divided into 12 months of 30 days, with 5 additional extra days at the end of the year. These 5 days were known as the epigomenal days, considered outside normal time. They were believed to be both sacred and unstable. Myth said that the gods Osiris, Isis, Horus, Set, and Nephthys were born during this liminal period. Some Egyptians celebrated them with rituals and festivals. Others treated them with caution, even fear. It was a moment when time itself seemed to pause, neither belonging to the old year nor the new. Not chaos, but suspension, a breath held between cycles. The Nile itself shaped not only agriculture, but orientation, identity, and worldview.